Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Dr. Glenn Vo. Welcome to another episode of Dr. Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm super excited to have this guest. Before I introduce him, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. What if you had someone who could help you navigate the murky waters of financial planning and investing? And what if that person's kind of dedicated his life to making sure that you don't get ripped off, that he's fully transparent and very honest, right? And what if I told you that person is here today? Aryeh Sheinbein. Aryeh, what's up?
How are you, Glenn? Thanks for having me.
I am super excited. And just to let you guys know, here's the thing. Okay, here's the thing. Aryeh is very special here because I actually work with him, and everything he's talking about, I've actually gone through. And he has like such a refreshing approach. Because here's the thing. You know, when you're talking about financial planning, when you're talking about investing, there's always an expert, right? I mean, my neighbor next door comes up to me and talks to me about NFTs and crypto and whatnot. I'm like, dude, you're an engineer, man. And then you probably have that uncle, right? Or that cousin who kind of dabbles in investing and they give you all this advice. And it's kind of hard to figure out who to talk to. But here's the thing. The reason why my guest is here is because this is what he does for a living. And he helps so many other entrepreneurs, not just myself, all these amazing entrepreneurs, making sure that we don't make the wrong decisions, but also getting the right deal flow. So, Aryeh, let's just dive right into it. Because again, I'm sure people have perked up. They're watching this, they're listening to this, and they're wondering, okay, yeah, I've had that happen before. Like my cousin who kind of dabbles in crypto and I probably lost a bunch of money, or maybe I'm just watching, CNBC and just getting advice there. Aryeh, let's just talk about your background, because there's always a background, there's always an origin story. Talk about your background and how did you end up working with people like me?
Yeah, so it's a long, windy path. So I'm going to try and make it as succinct and followable as possible. So I think we're going to go back to when I was a kid.
Okay.
And it started in sports cards. And I didn't realize that at the time because I kind of took it for granted. But when I was a kid, I'm going to date myself a little bit and age myself a little bit. And that is, the internet wasn't a thing. So you couldn't pull up a price of a baseball card, or any sports card for that matter, on the internet. And it came out once a month in a price guide called Beckett. Yeah. And the stores and everything, they would get the price guide, right? Well, the interesting thing is that between the time of publications, there was roughly 30 days or so, give or take. And the sports that were going on, the players were actually still playing, meaning if a rookie was getting hot during those 30 days, it wasn't reflected in the market pricing of something. And I'd be like, oh, this player is an amazing rookie. Like, let me look up what he's worth. Oh, the card's worth $3. But I'm like, wait a second. That was the last time they published it. By the next time it comes out, if he continues to play really well, they're going to have a little triangle with the up, direction on it. And that card's going to be $5. And so what I started to do was, I didn't realize at the time, I was basically arbitraging the pricing of when the last publication came out to the next one. And I would accumulate cards that I thought were going up in value in the interim. And either if the player continued on, I would immediately kind of sell for the profit, would hold because I thought he can continue, or I would just flip out because I'm not sure. Like there was a guy, I remember when I was really little, there was a guy in the Yankees. I'm from New York, and Kevin Moss, and he went on a tear and he hit like 8 home runs in 7 games or something like that. And it was like right at the end of the season. And he never, you don't hear about him. He's not a Hall of Famer, but his cards were like on a tear really quickly, but you couldn't tell if it was just going to be a fluke or not. And that was like one of those hey, should we just kind of flip it for profit type of thing? And so I went into finance when I went to college. So I went to, finished. By the time I was like 15, I actually stopped going. When I was like 12, 13, I would go to shows like these at like hotels. My father, my mother, they would drive me, to these shows, and they would let me kind of like peruse and buy stuff. And that's how I accumulated some of these things. But by the time I was 15, I actually went to shows and I actually had the table and I was selling. And then I started to have like my friends come with me, and they would man the tables so I could go around the show and try and buy more inventory, so to speak. But that back then, I was very much raised like, we go to school, we get a good job, we do the things, right? And so like when high school ended, kind of like the sports card stuff more or less really ended for me too. I wasn't like really, but I didn't take note that I already started like loving business and loving like, hey, we could buy this piece of land and do something with it. Like I was seeing that I was giving people ideas or actually wanting to do these things, but I didn't think of that as, hey, that's what my career is going to be. So I went to college, got a finance degree, went to Wall Street, went to work at JP Morgan in their investment banking and credit research departments. And I, after a couple of years there, I moved into a small venture capital and private equity firm. And I started to really understanding investing in businesses and how to value businesses and what makes something work, what makes it not work. Why would someone pay, $10 for something versus $20 or 20 million and 100 million, whatever the numbers are, right? It's just zeros. And ultimately, I started down a path that I really liked what I was doing, but almost immediately after I got one of my first jobs, like at JP Morgan, I started building some e-commerce businesses. And it started in the same way. It actually started with sports cards again, that I was arbitraging different markets. So there was Yahoo auctions, there was eBay, and Amazon wasn't even like really a thing in the same sense. You couldn't sell on it. And I was buying in one market, selling in another market, and just making the profit. And so that's why I was like, oh, I could just buy wholesale product and then sell it retail. And that's how I got into all these different things. I started meeting more and more and more entrepreneurs and people who were building their own things, had their own missions. They wanted to accomplish a lot of things. But my day job career was still valuing businesses, investing in businesses, investing in different securities, and learning all the ins and outs. And what I realized was, I had this knowledge base that most entrepreneurs just didn't have, or doctors, or anyone who didn't go down the path of being in the investment world. And that was, people are successful. People are, resourceful and have their own businesses. Again, whether they're a practitioner or whether they have a business, but they A, don't have time to manage their money. And B, they don't have the knowledge base. And most people are like fearful. They either fall into one of two categories, right? They either are aggressive because they want to like hit it out of the park and get the next 100x thing, right? Because exactly like you said, your cousin, someone else, or they are super fearful because they've worked so hard for the money, they don't want to lose it. And that gap of knowledge of like, okay, what makes sense? What should I be doing? Was just becoming more and more apparent to me, because people who I was just meeting at conferences, all, whether they were entrepreneurs or whether they were practitioners of different sorts, lawyers, doctors, all these things, they were like, I just don't know what to do. And they would start asking me questions. And the big thing with financial services, unfortunately, is the industry is very focused on, I sell a product or service, and that's how I'm paid. And so therefore, I'm going to push you into that product or service because that's the only way I'm going to make money. If I tell you to use this other thing and that's not what I offer, well, then I can't make money. And so it became like this, everyone's like, wow, this financial advisor. And I'm like, well, the problem is that guy is at Edward Jones or Merrill Lynch. He can only offer you what the vertical that they offer, right? Like if they only offer mutual funds or stocks, but they can't get you into real estate, you won't have exposure to it. And then he's definitely not going to educate you on real estate because he can't sell you real estate. And so I started like really working with people who were like, I want to understand, but I also want someone to just tell me something without their incentive being to make me do that, right? And so that's where I kind of like adopted this thesis of product agnostic. You want life insurance as a vehicle? Fine. You want real estate? Fine. You want crypto? You want stock? I have dealt with and deal with all these things. And I want to empower the person to feel comfortable to have enough knowledge base. And then at the same time, I want them to say, okay, like here, I don't really know, help me understand or help me decide or show me things that I wouldn't necessarily have seen. But I also don't want, some people want to spend a ton of time doing it, but a lot of people don't. And I want to be able to kind of throttle that for them in the sense of there's that push and pull. Someone who's really involved, I don't have to be as involved. Someone who's not involved, I could be more involved. And that's kind of how it kind of got there.
Wow. Well, so, I mean, there's so many ways that we could dive into that, right? But, the big elephant in the room, right? The big elephant in the room is, and I get this from other doctors all the time. They're like, well, my practice is doing good. I'm doing good, man. Like I'm good. Like, I don't want to risk anything. And I always tell them, I was like, man, life, if the pandemic hasn't taught you anything, It's taught you that anything can be possible. Anything is possible. Anything can happen in a split second. Your industry could drop down 50% or things can happen. I mean, and again, I just bring out like, look at the cruise industry. Actually, look at healthcare. When we didn't know what was going on, the first thing that happened was like, okay, everything's shut down. You can only do X amount of procedures. You can only see X amount of people. And that changed your business right there. So again, the big elephant in the room is, well, hey, I'm doing pretty good. Like, why should I? Like, and I'm sure you get that all the time, Aryeh. So what do you say to those people who are like, oh, I'm doing pretty good. I'll just keep on doing what I'm doing. What do you say?
Yeah. So I think I say a few things. Number one is I'm really happy that you're doing well, but whatever you're doing, so let's say you are that dentist, right?
Mhm.
And you're throwing off hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, whatever it is, of free cash flow at the end of the year. That money, I don't care how great your practice is or how many practices you have or how many clinics you're running and ultimately want to sell them for, that money that you're making today, it needs to be growing.
Yeah.
And so item number one is, I don't care what you do with it, but it needs to, that your money needs to make money. That's item number
Because
one.
if it's just in the bank account, what happens?
It is losing value, right?
And in fact, it's losing now, right?
Yeah. And so people, so like, I don't want to get too into inflation, but I'm going to explain one thing at a very high level because people are like, I don't understand. The $1 million was there yesterday and the $1 million is there today. So why are you saying it's worth this, right? And so just the simple way to think about it is the buying power, the usage that you can get out of it. I mean, just think about your home. Like, what did it cost to buy your home 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? And if you want to make it super granular, go, and maybe people don't even know, but like if you go to a grocery store, what is the price of a gallon of milk? And if you were able to just go on Google and put in the price of milk 5 years ago, you'll be shocked, right? And you're like, whatever, it's $2.50 a gallon, $3.50 a gallon. Who the hell knows what it is? Why are you asking me such a silly question? Well, because the reality is like, if you go back pre-pandemic, right? And let's say it was $2 a gallon and now it's $2.50 a gallon. And you're like, whatever, it's 50 cents. No, math is about percentages.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the reality is that's a 25-ish% increase in the cost of milk. And if you think the milk went up 25%, do you think nothing else went up 25%? I mean, we know that like lumber has been in the news, oil's been in the news, but if you start to say that the cost of goods goes up and your $1 million is still in the bank, and now it's the same $1 million, but guess what? It's going to buy you less. It's going to have less buying power. So that's the simplest way to kind of like think about inflation and that kind of thing.
And I love it too, because again, if you're just putting your money in the bank, right? If you're just leaving it there, you're not doing anything, right? Then again, it's kind of like dumb money, right? Like you want your money to keep working. I mean, yeah, you're working so hard, whether it's in your office, whether it's your clinic, whether you're selling courses, whatever you're doing, speaking on stage, that takes a lot of effort. And yes, it's hard earned money, but if you're not letting your money work for you, then you're kind of missing the point of growing your wealth. Now, you brought up this super important thing. And again, I always have people always come up to me. They're like, yeah, I have a guy, I have a financial planner. Like I have this guy at, Merrill Lynch or whatever. Right.
Right.
And again, just bringing up the fact that, those guys, again, they help a lot of people, but your situation might not need that particular product. So just kind of dive into that for a little, because I think that's a lot of times people get a little confused because my financial situation might be different from the doctor next door and vice versa, but yet we're getting pitched the same product.
Yeah.
Talk about why that is just inherently, that's just flawed. Talk about that.
It definitely has its issues, right? And so, like you said, I'm not crapping on them because they don't do good in the world, right? Like they're doing a service, but the reality is if you are at any of these agencies, whether it's the Merrill Lynch's or the Edward Joneses, right? Their job, okay, is to, yes, look at your plan, but the only way that they're going to say, okay, we can grow your assets to have later, to use later for your kids, for yourself, whatever it is they're going to say, well, these are the things we can put it in. Mm-hmm. There are the mutual funds, there are the stocks, there are the bonds, there are the bond funds, the ETFs, because ultimately they're paid to bring the money into their firm and put it into those products. And we're not even going to get into all the fee structure and stuff like that, but they're paid to aggregate these assets and put it in there. But like you said, you and your neighbor may have different needs. You may have different wants and different risk tolerances. So if you say to them, hey, listen, my neighbor, I know he's in all the tech companies, they're crashing right now. That's all fine and good. And he wants high growth, but I want something that's going to cash flow. I want to invest in real estate. They'll be like, oh, that sounds like a nice idea. But unfortunately, they don't have that offering. And therefore, they're not going to talk about it. They may even try and talk you out of it.
Yeah,
because,
so that you can go to their products.
Right. Because if you, let's say you have $1 million with them, $2 million, $5 million, whatever the number is, they're paid based on that number. And if you're like, well, I want to take a third of that out and put it into real estate, guess what just happened? You took a third of their assets. So the money that they're going to make kind of dropped by a third because you're taking it and doing something else with it. But really, that may be in your best interest. That really may be what fits your profile and how you're going to sleep better at night or something like that. And so they're not incentivized to help you there. At that point, they're incentivized to convince you otherwise. And so that's part of the challenge. And so, when we talked about your money making money, your money growing, it also goes to this whole thing of like what you were saying, right? You're working in the office, you're speaking from stage, whatever you're doing, that's what I call active income, right? So you're actively doing something. And if the day comes that you are no longer actively doing it, you want to know that your money is quote unquote passively. I use that in quotes simply because it's one of these weird things, like how passive is it? What is really the definition of passive? But passively, it should be growing and it needs to be going out. And basically I tell people like your money, your dollars, they're your army, okay? And their job is to go out and recruit more soldiers. And so the soldiers go out and they get more soldiers, or some people say, hey, like they're, like they make more babies. But at the end of the day, you need that pot, that pile, whatever you want to call it, to grow. And the way that happens is by having things that fit your profile and that they're actively, that money is actively doing something on its own.
I love it. I love it. And guys, if you're really enjoying what you're watching and what you're listening to, that's why I love working with this man here. Again, he takes a very academic approach to a lot of things, explains things. And I want you to think about this, right? You can have all the desire, you can have all the goals you want, but if you don't have the right strategy, right, it's going to take you twice as long to get where you want to go. And again, Aryeh is all about the strategy, right? So, okay, so we're going to talk about how you're going to reach out to him, how you're going to, there's different ways to work with Aryeh. You can work the way I work with it. I just dive right in. But again, he has like a course, he has an academic way for you to really kind of like learn things and then start working. We'll talk about that later, but we're going to switch gears and I'm going to just throw something at you. Do you still have your baseball card collection?
So
like, do you still have it, or did you like,
I have
just sell it all? Like,
I
you
have
still
parts
have
of
it.
I have parts of it. Yeah. So
So now the follow-up question is this: what's your most valuable card?
So I would say two of my most valuable cards.
Let's go valuable with monetarily, and valuable meaning also meaning a lot to you. Let's do those two. Because sometimes they're different. Sometimes they're different.
So the valuable so most of the cards I have today are valuable to me. And I have some that are just valuable, right? So like I have a LeBron James. So the big thing that happened that really changed is the industry now really wants your cards to be what we call graded. So you send them into a professional place and they seal it up and they're like, okay, this is an 8 out of 10, a 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, right? So like I have a LeBron James graded rookie that's probably the most dollar valuable. But the cards that I actually hold much closer to my heart are the cards like the players that I loved when I was a kid that I still have some of them. So I have like a Jerry Rice rookie card.
Oh, nice.
That was close to me. Even though I am a New Jersey born and bred and, Metro New York area person, I have been a 49er fan since I was like 7 years old. And so the San Francisco 49ers, Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, those were like when I was growing up. And I have Joe Montana. I do not have his rookie card, but I have the Jerry Rice rookie card.
I'm surprised that you haven't tried to get it.
So I have debated it. And the challenge is, honestly, the cards that were made in like the 80s, from a value perspective, it would much more be a sentimental thing because the value of those cards, it was kind of like, the easiest way to explain it is they just let the printing presses run for like a decade. And so the number of availability of some of those cards is just massive. And so the value really hasn't appreciated to some of the cards today. Like if you look at a Joe Burrow rookie card that's graded 10, those cards are worth way more than
Yeah.
any of these Hall of Famers rookie cards. And that kind of like is a little bit depressing. So like I can get it, but the reason the ones I have are more closer to my heart is because I actually collected those as opposed to like went out and bought them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like, and I'll tell you a quick story on that. Like I wanted a Joe Montana and I wanted a Jerry Rice autograph. And so most of the time the shows were like in California and they were on the weekends. And like I was a kid, and even when I was like in my 20s, like I couldn't get out there. And so I just bought one. Right. And I was like, okay. And I went, like, you could pre-order with the show. And they're like, okay, if you do you want it on a football, do you want it on a poster? Do you want it on a 8x10 foot? You know, like tell us what you want. So like if you want it on a football, you have to buy the football from them. So I'm like, okay, bought the football, $150 for like a regular NFL football with a white leather patch over it so that they, you know, can put it in Sharpie. Okay. Then they're like, it's like, well, if you want one autograph, it's like $250, but if you want both, it's only like $450. So I'm like, whatever. I spent like $600 whatever dollars on this all in, right? And when I got it, I was like so emotionally let down by the whole thing, because it was just like another package that came and like, you know, I put it in a case, a plastic casing, one of these cubes. I was like, I have no attachment to it.
Yeah.
So like the Jerry Rice rookie though, I have since when I was a kid collecting it. It had so much more value and attachment to me. It's the same with Wayne Gretzky. He got traded from the Edmonton Oilers to the LA Kings. Now, I was not a Kings fan or an Oilers fan, but I was a Wayne Gretzky fan. And the year he got traded, I got in the pack. There's a card, a hockey card, where Wayne Gretzky is holding up the new Kings jersey in front of him, wearing 99. And for whatever reason, that card actually is pretty valuable. And I have that card, but again, it was because like I collected it, as opposed to like hopping on eBay now and like kind of grabbing something, you know. So that's kind of like the long and the short of that.
I love that. I love that. Just, yeah. And I'm a collector of jerseys. So my favorite jerseys, the ones that are up, I do have jerseys that are up. I have jerseys that are just kind of sealed away to make sure that they're okay. But the ones that are up on my wall are my Kobe Bryant, the first, before he changed his number, before the incident, right? So I have the Kobe, I have, of course, Tom Brady, but Tom Brady, Tampa's Tom Brady autographed jersey on the wall. Magic Johnson, because I was a big Laker fan. He's the reason why I started watching basketball. And then Craig Biggio, who played for the Houston Astros. Sure. He's my favorite Astro. So again, like I'm all about that. But yes, it's like, it's almost like, it's been graded to, it has all the authentications, but yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, you don't know where it's gonna go. I mean, maybe hopefully my son keeps it or whatnot, but at least, hey, he can do something with that. So I'm all about that. And I'll have to share later on a little 49ers story that I think you will always remember about that. We'll do that later, but we're going to switch gears. We're going to switch gears. And our next segment is the Big Entrepreneur 3. Everyone knows about that. And so in the Big Entrepreneur 3, I'm going to ask you 3 entrepreneurial questions. And the first one is, share a productivity tip that could help entrepreneurs. Something that you...
All right. So my productivity tip, I've tried to adjust a lot of these things as I see something working, not working. And I find, you know, sometimes I can improve it. Sometimes it gets worse. And I like never kind of keep the status quo. But the tip that I do is the night before I go to bed, I actually look over my calendar for the next day. And it does a few things. It first kind of gets me in the mindset of like, what does my day look like? As opposed to like showing up and being like, oh, what do I got to do today? Right? Like I'm kind of like going to bed a little bit more prepared for the next day. So if I have an 8 a.m. meeting or a 9 a.m. meeting, I'm not like scrambling in the morning. Like I knew going in, like, okay, this is what. And so I kind of go over my calendar. I also then, from a productivity standpoint, is I look at, based on that calendar, what are really the big things? I do this at the beginning of the week. What are the big things I need to do for the week that are going to move things down the line or move the goalposts or whatever you want to say, like get the accomplishment. And so I find I personally do really well. I do a lot of good work at night, but I also know that there are certain things that if I can do first thing in the morning, it will change the whole day. Like if I can get one big thing done that like I procrastinate, I know I'm going to procrastinate, because if I don't do it at like 9 a.m., it's going to be 4 p.m. I'm going to be drained and I'm not going to have done it. and it's not something I'm going to want to do at night.
Yeah.
And so, or it can't be done at night, or whatever it is. So like I try and get one thing done, like that, to kind of identify when I'm looking at the week, and then I look at the night before, what is that one thing that I can kind of pound out early when I guess fresh. Like I say, I guess only because some people are different. Like I
Yeah,
know
I
that
love that. I mean, again, you just threw two tips in there, amazing tips right there. Now, share with us a something like a tool, like an entrepreneurial tool. It could be digital, it could be non-digital, it could be like a little workbook or whatnot, or something like an app or something. But share a tool that helped you as an entrepreneur that could help other people.
Okay, so I'm going to give one digital and one non-digital.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Over delivering, I love it.
So I am a pen and paper kind of person. And so I actually use like old school planners and like, writing all this stuff down. The digital is a calendar. I just like to know what everything is going to be that day, but everything else I like handwritten. So like using an actual planner, I find that like taking the time to write it, and I have a Remarkable as well, so that if people want like the digital version of that, but I find like actually handwriting things really changes how I think about things. And on that handwriting thing, I actually started probably right around the beginning of the pandemic, right before the pandemic. I started much more of a gratitude journal simultaneously. In my opinion, like even if you do one thing, and it's not like I tell people like one thing you are thankful for that day, as opposed to like, oh, my health, oh, my family. Those are all great, but like one thing that day, it will change your outlook. So that's the old school kind of things. And the productivity that I find is super helpful for me from a digital it's called Otter. And it's a transcription, I don't know if we call it service, because they have the free and a paid version. But a lot of times, like you find yourself like you want to send yourself a voice note, or you are thinking about, hey, I'm going to write something up, but you don't
Get
really
a good
have the
idea,
time.
spur of the moment, good idea. Yeah.
And you're like, I can't really type, or I can't, Otter, it's both on the web and it's on the phone app. And it's kind of like a voice note, but it transcribes the whole thing and it keeps the voice component of it. So sometimes the transcription is a little bit wonky, but it's going to play it back and you'll be like, oh, that's not what I said. But like I said something different than you transcribed, but I know what I was talking about now because you heard your own voice.
Great tips there. Great tips there. And Otter has actually been brought on multiple times by other guests. And so for those who are watching and listening, there must be a secret there, right? If everyone says that, right? Okay, so this is going to be a hard one. This is always a tough one. It always stumps everybody. But I need you, the first thing that comes to your head, let's do that, okay? Because if you can sit there and you can really think about this question. The first thing that pops in your head, favorite book, business or self-help, and why? First thing that pops in your head.
Okay, so I read a lot. So we're trying to like distill down a ton into this. I would say the top book, and it may have been used 100 other times, but is Atomic Habits.
It's a classic.
So James Clear, I love the book. And I would say like part of the reason I'll tell you why I picked that book, because like I love everything Adam Grant, and Extreme Ownership is another really good book. But the reason I like Atomic Habits is it really gets you to understand like what makes success, what gets you to change, what is a habit and how to kind of go about it. And there's a lot of books on habits. I find the way he writes it out and the way he explains things, and even now you can get on his free newsletter, he kind of puts out stuff. It's just, for me, the way he writes and the way he thinks kind of resonates with me. And so like, if you haven't read the book, definitely, worth a read. If you've read it and you're like, oh, I'm not really sure, maybe take a listen to it in Audible or something else, and maybe you'll get a different perspective on it. But I really highly recommend it.
Well, and the thing is, there's so many great books out there, right? But for me, the books that really resonate are the ones that you actually can take something and like an actionable step. Like everything you learn in there, you literally could implement. You can put the book down and actually implement it, right? And again, things like habit stacking, stuff like that. I love it. And that's an amazing book. And just another thing too, if you already read the book, I mean, you already brought it up about that newsletter. You need to sign up. This newsletter is not just a bunch of like spam. It's actually good stuff. So again, highly recommend doing that. Okay, so we're going to switch gears again. And, I have all of these different entrepreneurs that come on and you guys are doing amazing things. But for me, where you learn the most is through mistakes. So we're going to do the blast of the past, learning from the past. And so I'm going to ask you to share a mistake that you learned something significant from.
Okay, so I have made plenty of mistakes. I've made,
Hey, that's me too. Welcome to the club.
yeah. And I would say one of the things that I really learned recently is that, like, I have 4 kids, and I wish I had encouraged my kids to make more mistakes, because like we live in this perfectionist world, or at least I mentally am always like, no, we want to get it right, all these
Yeah.
things. And like the idea that failure is much more of a learning tool than feeling this, depressed feeling about it is critical. So I think if I go back, I'm going to use an investing lesson that I had. And so it was probably 2007 or so. And I was investing in one of my first big real estate deals. And I, on some level, didn't fully understand certain things.
Mhm.
And I thought I did, or maybe I was pretending to myself to tell myself I did, because I was like, oh, I'm a smart guy and I've been doing this stuff for a long time. And I was using both my personal capital, and I was at the firm. I was kind of like leading the charge on this investment. And I was kind of blinded by the upside. And without really drilling into what is the negativity, what are the potential downsides here, like what could go wrong. And so the lesson that I've always had, like Warren Buffett is always like, hey, protect the capital, rule number one. Rule number two, see rule number one, right? Like his whole thing is like, always think about the downside before you think about the upside. And so the mistake that I made is once you personally get involved in something, now your view starts to get skewed, because like you're like, oh, you start to like have blinders on, and you forget about the downside. So leaving emotion out is critical for any investment. And this investment, though, I was so much more emotionally attached. I'm not even sure why, but like I had gone to the site, I had done the diligence, and the truth is like we had totally misgauged what the cost to
Wow.
renovate part of the property was, and what the marketing cost was to fill the building. So it was this massive property. It had 4 massive buildings. One was totally empty. And we're like, oh, we can rent this thing up, no problem, blah, blah, blah. And basically everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. Then 2008 hit, so more things went wrong. So the lessons there were, hey, be okay with like pushing on the emotion of like keeping your emotion out, and then like really diligencing some things, in the sense of like, what are the costs? Who said that? Like, how did you come to that conclusion? And then in investing, specifically in real estate, like that taught me to be very focused on how much leverage, how much debt has to be serviced. Meaning like, if something goes wrong, will we lose the property to the bank because we can't pay the debt? And so
Wow,
that
that's a
became
scary
like,
thought.
yeah. And ultimately, like, we didn't lose the property, but the property needed more money. And you had a choice as an investor: either ante up and stay in, or don't, and you're gonna basically get 10-20 cents on the dollar. And
Yeah.
most people went with the 10-20 cents on the dollar, because if you were living through the '08 to 2010 timeframe, you're like, whatever, give me whatever I can get.
Yeah.
This is,
Yeah.
the world's ending, just give it to me. And the truth is, the guy who stayed in, who the operator, like I still talk to him to this day, he's made a killing on that. But for a couple of years, he ate dirt, and his reputation was questionable and whatever it is, but he came out on the other side pretty, looking pretty good.
Wow. Well, so many great lessons in that as well. I mean, biggest one I got from that is, sometimes you got to take the emotion out of things, and that's not just investing, that's just decision making in general. So
For
again, that's
sure.
that's a great lesson right there. Now, if you can go back in time, right? If you could get into that DeLorean, if you can get into that hot tub time machine, go back in time and talk to the younger version of yourself at any point
Yeah.
in time, right?
Yeah.
And you only had like a minute to just share some advice, what would that be?
So I think the advice would be the following, and that is, we all, anyone who's listening, right, no matter where they are, whether they're an entrepreneur, whether they're a dentist, whether they're a doctor, whether they have like 50 practices or one, they're successful. Everyone is successful on some level. But and we've all kind of bet on ourselves. But I would go back and tell myself, my younger self, 2 key things. Number one, bet on yourself hard. Like, don't question, like, can I do it? Can I not? Like, you can do it. Everybody can do it, But if you are already somewhat successful, you could be probably 10x the success level because you probably doubted yourself. I know I did, right? Like, yeah, what do I really know? Da, da, da. But like bet on myself. And number two would be accumulate skills. Because if I have different skills, then I can bet on myself more and more and more and not have the fear of how's this going to work and stuff like that. Because if I had left every job after a point where I was like, you know what, I'm not learning anything anymore. I'm now just maintaining. I would have probably more skills and it may not have worked out better, but I know that like a lot of times most people get into a situation and they're kind of like plateaued, right? And they're just like cruising. And maybe they like to learn things on the side. Like I'm intellectually curious. I want to learn more and more. But if I had done that in the job side, in my career and all the businesses, the exponential growth would have been probably even more like, hey, no, I'm not learning anything now. I need to like catapult and do something more. So those are probably like the two things: bet on myself and continuously like learn more and more skills.
I love that. I love that. And I think that's something that a lot of young people fall into that trap, right? Let's say they're in a particular job and they're like, I'm just going to punch my time clock and just do what I got to do to just get through my job and just spend some time there. But, you know, you lose the opportunity of like actually learning something extra, maybe getting mentors, right? Maybe leaving a position, going to something else so you can get more of those skills that you're talking about. I love that advice. And again, I'm going to steal that. I'm going to use that on my own kids as well. Now, if we were at a party, right, where let's say we're at a dinner party and some guy just walks into you, some really motivated entrepreneur just walks up to you, pulls you aside and say, I want to do what you do. And I came up to you and said, Aryeh, our Uber is going to be here in like 1 minute. So I'm going to leave you. You got to take off. And this kid's pulling you aside and says, okay, can you just share with me? I want to do what you do. You only had 1 minute to say it. What would you tell him?
Wow. So I think I would go back to the point I just made, right? And I would say, okay, what you want to do is accumulate skills. Mm-hmm. And so in today's world, the availability of learning skills is exponentially more than what we had, right? Like 10, 20 years ago, what it would take you and I to learn how to do certain things would be 10, 20 years potentially. Whereas today, you literally can go on YouTube and learn skills tremendously. So you can
become a cook. You can become a chef.
You can do so many things, right? So I would say like from if someone wanted to understand investing, understand valuing things, understand financial wellness and financial, planning and accuracy and all this and literacy around it, the books and videos that are out there today is huge. But I wouldn't want them to randomly just do things, in the sense that like if you could find a mentor who will they don't have to spend a lot of time, but they can kind of give you direction of what skills to be acquiring, right? So in 60 seconds, I can't give them all the skills that they need, but they need to understand fundamentals about business, understand fundamentals of accounting, not the tick and the tie, but what does it mean when you look at something, the profit, the loss, how to think about these things. Understanding the differences between, hey, do you want a job? Do you want to work for yourself? Or do you want to build a business? Because those are three different things, right? Like if you work for yourself, yes, but you have a job that if you stop going into the office today and no one else is going to execute for you, understand that that's different than if you run a business where if you don't show up today, but everybody else executes, it's still growing, right? And so teaching them these different basic things in those 60 seconds, and then those are the skills they need to kind of like go out and focus on. And then probably get a mentor of some sort who's just been down that path, who can kind of shortcut you. Every time you deal with someone who knows something that you didn't know, it just, again, it shortcuts the path to success.
I love it. I mean, for anyone who's starting any kind of business right now, right? Maybe you have a professional job, you're thinking to do a side gig, all the stuff that Aryeh just shared. I mean, that's like the path, right? To figuring out if you want to do something else right there, getting the skills, finding a mentor. I love that stuff. Now, before we talk about how people can get a hold of you and to reach out, I said earlier that I was going to share a memory about the Niners, right? So this might not be a good memory for you.
Oh boy.
But one of the best games I've ever watched. And it was like, I think the score was like maybe 10-9 or something really, like a really low scoring affair. It was the NFC Championship game against the Giants and the 49ers.
Yes.
That year, the Niners, like they were steamrolling everyone. And earlier that year, they torched the Giants in the Meadowlands. And so you're like, okay, it's going to be over. Joe Montana's on fire. Jerry Rice is on fire. And Bill Parcells like called like the best game ever. He did like total ball control, didn't let Joe Montana get the ball and everything, but they won with defense and one play that actually changed the trajectory of the season. But also, I would say Joe Montana's career was when Leonard Marshall knocked him out of the game.
Yep.
And I don't know if you remember that. He knocked him out of the game, blindsided him. And that was kind of like that was it. Like Montana was out and then the rest is history. And then Bill Parcells won his second Super Bowl and stuff like that. So I know it's a bad memory, but it was it was one of the best games. And it wasn't really high scoring.
No,
but it was just like, it was so.
As long as you didn't bring up the one, there was one where I'm trying to remember what year it was, like 86, the year the Giants won that Super Bowl. The 49ers played the Giants in the playoffs in that run. And Lawrence Taylor knocked Joe Montana pretty hard too. And that was a blowout of a game. I feel like it was like a 40-0. Like it was some terrible score, 49-3, something. I don't remember what it was, but it was horrible. And I was like devastated. Then that game that was a really close game, it was a totally different type of game. And yeah, Joe Montana definitely, like, you know, Steve Young's reign began shortly.
Yeah, shortly afterwards. And again, for you, the fact that you're a Niners fan and you lived in that kind of tri-state area, you had like a front row seat there because it was just like it was the Niners and the Giants, right?
Yep.
It's always those guys.
And all my friends were Giant fans.
And the thing is like, it's so funny because, you know, again, like you look at how just certain things, like a couple of, like maybe just like a play or two can change like the whole trajectory of like either someone's career or also like someone's legacy. And really it brings back to, you know, what you're doing right now. Let's say you're going to big practice or maybe your business is doing well, right? But if you're not making the right decisions on the financial side, it could change the trajectory of where your life is going to be headed, right? It could mean that if you make the wrong decisions, you end up practicing dentistry or medicine or whatever it is an extra 20 years as opposed to 5 years. Or maybe if you're speaking from the stage or you're traveling a lot and you build up all this wealth, and if you don't have the right strategy, you could be doing that a lot longer. So again, we bring up that sports analogy, but really that's why you need to have the right strategy. That's why you need to work with someone like Aryeh, because that's what he does. You don't go and ask someone to teach you how to become a chef who's never done it before, right? Who doesn't live that life. With that being said, what's the best way? What's the best way for all our viewers, for all our listeners to connect with you and to kind of get on the right path?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. So they can head over to solutionadvisory.com, is a quick five question kind of questionnaire. You can head over to futurefundme.com if you want to kind of get an understanding of like, hey, do you have a game plan in place and kind of want to do it yourself, less hands-on with me. And then, you know, the social platforms that I'm on, I'm on Instagram, Aryeh the Businessman.
And I'll make sure
you'll
get the right one, because there's a lot of imposters that love copying this guy.
Unfortunately, that is true. And so and the last thing is like recently I've taken to Twitter. So I actually I had an account from like, I don't know, 2008, but I literally just started tweeting probably like, 6-8 months ago or something like that. And that's just my name, Aryeh Sheinbein.
I love it. But guys, we're going to have everything in the show notes. We'll have all the links there. And if you're not part of the Freedom of the 9 to 5 group, we're actually going to bring him back on to a Facebook Live in there. Aryeh, thank you so much for jumping on. Totally appreciate it. Guys, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.